Have you ever wondered what happens in the space between waking and sleeping, where your mind becomes a theater for horrors you never invited? Tonight, I'm going to share 12 stories with you. 12 glimpses into the darkness that waits just beyond the edge of consciousness. Some are rooted in documented events, others in whispered legends that refuse to die, but all of them share one thing. They'll make you question what you thought you knew about the world around you. Let me begin with a story about mirrors, those everyday objects we trust without thinking. Scientists have discovered that when you stare at your own reflection in dim light for about 10 minutes, your brain begins to distort what you see. It's called the strange face in the mirror illusion. But what if there's more to it than neuroscience admits? In 1989, a woman named Catherine Mills documented her experience in a psychiatric journal before she disappeared. She'd been participating in mirror-gazing experiments, and she wrote that each session revealed her face changing into someone else, someone with hollow eyes and a smile that stretched too wide. On her final entry, she wrote only this: "It's not my reflection anymore. It's been watching me through the glass, learning how to be me." Tonight, I think we're going to switch places. Her apartment was found empty, but neighbors reported seeing her through the windows for weeks afterward, always standing perfectly still, always staring at that same mirror. Ask yourself this: when you look in the mirror, are you absolutely certain you're looking at your own reflection and not something looking back? The second story takes us beneath the surface of something familiar. You've probably heard of number stations, those mysterious radio broadcasts that have puzzled listeners since the Cold War. They're real, documented by government agencies worldwide, transmitting sequences of numbers in monotone voices to unknown recipients. But there's one station that's never been explained, one that doesn't appear in any official records. It's known only as UVB-76 among the few who've encountered it. Unlike other stations, it doesn't broadcast numbers. It broadcasts a warning in children's voices, speaking in a language linguists can't identify. In 2003, a radio enthusiast in Prague recorded over 40 hours of these transmissions. He claimed the pattern changed on specific dates, always 3 days before major disasters. The recording from September 8, 2001, was particularly chilling. He tried to alert authorities, but the morning after he submitted his evidence, he was found in his locked studio, every radio smashed, with one message written on the wall in his own hand: "They know I'm listening." The station still broadcasts. Some nights, if you scan the right frequency around 4:26 a.m., you might hear those small voices repeating their incomprehensible warning. What do you think they're trying to tell us? And why has no government ever acknowledged its existence? Now, let me tell you about the smiling room, a phenomenon documented in apartment buildings across 7 different countries. It always happens the same way. Tenants report hearing laughter from a specific room in their building, a room that's supposedly vacant. The laughter sounds joyful at first, like children playing, but it never stops. It continues for hours, days, bleeding through walls until residents can't sleep, can't think. When authorities finally open these rooms, they find them completely empty, except for one detail that appears in every single case: hundreds of smiles drawn on the walls in something that looks like charcoal but never quite washes off completely. The drawings are crude, childlike, but there's something wrong with the proportions, with the way the curves seem to follow you as you move. In Tokyo, investigators found that the smiling mouths numbered exactly 206 in one room. That's the same number of bones in the human body. After each discovery, residents in neighboring apartments begin to experience the same phenomenon. They find themselves smiling in their sleep, their facial muscles aching when they wake, their jaws sore as if they'd been grinning for hours without rest. The buildings are eventually condemned, but the question remains unanswered. What leaves these marks? And why does the laughter never appear on any audio recording devices? The fourth story is about stairs that appear where they shouldn't. Park rangers and search and rescue personnel have reported finding staircases in the middle of forests, far from any structure or trail. These aren't ruins or remnants of old buildings. They're perfectly maintained staircases, sometimes carpeted, sometimes wooden, leading nowhere. They appear in national forests across North America, and the official policy among rangers is never to climb them and never to let hikers approach them. One ranger broke this rule in 2012 in a forest in Oregon. He climbed 17 steps and reported feeling an overwhelming sense of being watched from below. When he looked down, he saw himself still standing at the bottom, looking up. He descended immediately, but the version of himself at the bottom didn't move, didn't acknowledge him. He ran, and later that night, he received a call on his personal cell phone. The voice was his own, asking, "Why did you leave me there?" He quit the next day, but he still receives calls from his own number, always at 3 a.m., always asking the same question. The stairs in that location were found collapsed the following week, splintered as if crushed from within. Have you ever felt drawn to something you knew you should avoid? What do you think would happen if someone climbed to the top? Let me share the fifth story, one that touches on something we all do without thinking: taking photographs. There's a phenomenon called photographic latency, where images appear in photographs that weren't visible when the picture was taken. Usually, it's explained by light reflections or camera glitches. But there's a specific type that cameras can't explain. It started appearing around 2015 when phone cameras became ubiquitous. People began noticing a figure in their photos, always in the background, always slightly out of focus. The figure appears only in photos taken in moments of genuine happiness. Weddings, birthdays, celebrations. It's always the same build, the same posture, but the face is never clear. Here's what makes it truly disturbing. When people are interviewed about these photos, they describe feeling a sudden coldness just before the picture was taken, a brief moment where their happiness faltered. One woman in Boston collected over 300 examples from strangers online. She noticed the figure appeared closer to the subjects with each passing year. In photos from 2015, it was barely visible at the edge of frames. By 2019, it was clearly present in the middle distance. In 2023, she received a photo where the figure was standing directly behind the subject, close enough that it should have been touching them. She tried to present her findings to paranormal researchers, but before she could publish, every digital copy of her collection was corrupted. The only image that remained was a selfie she'd taken the day before, and there in the background, finally in focus, was a face identical to her own, but decades older, with an expression of absolute despair. When you look at your happiest photos, do you see anything in the shadows that you don't remember being there? The sixth story concerns sound, specifically the hum that thousands of people report hearing worldwide. It's called the Taos hum, named after a town in New Mexico where it was first widely reported, but it's been documented globally. It's a low-frequency sound that about 2% of the population can hear, a persistent drone that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere. Scientific studies have failed to identify its source, but there's something researchers don't publicize. People who hear the hum report remarkably similar dreams. They dream of standing in a vast underground space, surrounded by machinery that's older than it should be, built from materials that don't quite look right. In these dreams, they understand that the hum is calling them, drawing them toward something beneath the earth. A geologist in Scotland became obsessed with these reports. He interviewed over 400 people who heard the hum, and he mapped their locations. The pattern he discovered terrified him. The hearers formed geometric patterns around specific points on the Earth's surface, points that didn't correspond to any known geological features. He attempted one excavation at a convergence point in rural Scotland and found a chamber 30 feet down that predated any known human construction in the area. Inside was a mechanism, still functioning, made of a metal alloy that contained elements that shouldn't exist in nature. He sealed the chamber immediately, but he continued to hear the hum, louder than before, and his notes suggest he believed it had changed its frequency, as if responding to being discovered. His final journal entry reads, "It's not trying to call us down. It's trying to tell us it's coming up." Have you ever heard a sound that no one else can hear? What if it's not in your head at all? For the seventh story, I need to tell you about the phenomenon of identical rooms. In hotels across the world, there are rooms that appear multiple times in the same building. Not similar rooms, but identical ones down to the smallest detail. The same scuff mark on the baseboard, the same stain on the ceiling, the same serial number on the television remote. Guests checking into these rooms on the same night report identical experiences. They wake at the same time, they see the same figure standing in the corner, they hear the same knocking pattern on the door. In 2017, a hotel in Singapore had to shut down an entire floor when 12 guests reported the same experience. They woke to find a message written in the steam on their bathroom mirrors, despite taking no shower. The message was always the same: room service. When they called the front desk to complain, the front desk called them first, asking why they'd requested room service, because the call had come from inside their room while they were on the line. The hotel investigated and found that the calls were indeed coming from the rooms, but the times on the log showed the calls originated 3 minutes before the guests picked up their phones to dial out. The rooms were stripped and renovated, but guests still report the same experience. The prevailing theory among paranormal researchers is that these are thin places, locations where multiple realities overlap, and guests aren't experiencing hauntings but instead are witnessing moments from parallel versions of themselves trapped in the same space. If you've ever checked into a hotel room and felt immediately that something was wrong, what do you think you were sensing? The eighth story is about a children's game that spread through playgrounds in the Pacific Northwest in the late 90s. It was called The Quiet Game, but it wasn't like the traditional version. Children would sit in a circle and close their eyes, and one child would be chosen as it. That child would walk around the circle in silence, and the others had to guess when it was standing directly behind them. Here's where it became disturbing. Children began insisting that there were always more footsteps than there should be, that something else walked the circle with them. Teachers tried to ban the game, but children continued playing it in secret. Several children were brought to psychologists after refusing to sleep without lights on, claiming that whatever walked the circle had followed them home. One child drew pictures of what she called the other one, a figure that was almost human but not quite, with joints that bent in too many places. The game faded from popularity, but in 2019, it resurfaced through social media, spreading among teenagers as a challenge. The new version had one additional rule. You play alone in a dark room, and you have to guess when it is behind you. Dozens of teenagers reported the same experience. They would feel breath on their neck, and when they opened their eyes and turned around, their phones would have taken dozens of selfies, all showing them sitting alone, except for one photo where something was indeed behind them, something that the human eye hadn't been able to see in the darkness. What games did you play as a child that, looking back, seem strange to you now? And who or what do you think children's games sometimes invoke? The ninth story takes us to the sea. There's a maritime legend about ships that sink but never settle, vessels that continue sailing beneath the surface, crewed by sailors who don't know they've drowned. Oceanographers using deep-sea sonar have detected anomalies that match this description. Objects moving at depths where no submarine could function, following shipping routes that haven't been used in decades. In 2008, a research vessel near the Mariana Trench detected a large object rising from the depths. As it ascended, they realized it matched the dimensions of a passenger ship that had disappeared in 1925. The sonar tracked it rising to within 200 feet of the surface before it stopped. The crew reported that their radio filled with static, and through the interference, they heard what sounded like a distress call in Morse code. The message, when translated, was simple: "We see you above us. We remember the sun." The object then descended rapidly, disappearing into the trench. The research team tried to report their findings, but the footage they'd recorded showed only empty water. The sonar logs, however, remained, proving something had been there. One crew member swore that just before the object descended, he saw lights through the water, portholes glowing as if the ship were still lit from within. Do you think consciousness can survive in the deep? What conversations do you imagine happen in the darkness of the ocean floor? For the 10th story, We turn to something that exists in almost every culture: the doppelganger. In German folklore, seeing your double is an omen of death. But there are documented cases that suggest something more complex. In 2011, a man in Chicago reported seeing himself getting into his car as he approached it in a parking garage. The double looked directly at him, smiled, and drove away. He reported the car stolen, but it was found parked in his driveway the next morning with the odometer showing an additional 300 miles. His GPS history showed the car had driven to 7 locations during the night, all of them addresses where he'd lived throughout his life, starting with his childhood home and ending at his current residence. Security footage from gas stations along the route showed him driving, but his credit cards were never used, and he had a verified alibi, having been at dinner with friends. The most disturbing detail came from his childhood home. The current residents reported that someone matching his description had stood in their yard for over an hour that night, staring at a second-floor window. When they called the police, the figure vanished, but it left behind a wallet in the grass containing his driver's license from 15 years ago, a license he distinctly remembered losing. He became obsessed with the question of where his double had gone, what it had been doing. 6 months later, he disappeared. His car was found in the same parking garage, and security footage showed him getting into the vehicle with someone who looked exactly like him. They drove away together. Neither has been seen since. Have you ever glimpsed someone who looked exactly like you from the corner of your eye? What would you do if you met yourself face to face? The 11th story is about a book that appears in used bookstores, always in the horror section, always priced at exactly $1. It has no title on the cover, just a symbol that resembles an eye with too many lids. The pages inside are handwritten, and the handwriting changes throughout, as if multiple people have contributed to it. The content is always different depending on who opens it, but it always tells a story about the reader, events from their life that no one else could know, but told from the perspective of someone watching them. The final page is always blank when first discovered, but readers report that if they keep the book, writing appears on that last page over the following days, describing events that haven't happened yet. A collector in Portland gathered testimonies from 19 people who'd owned the book. All of them reported that the predictions came true, but never in the way they expected. One woman read that she would find what she'd been searching for beneath her childhood home. She'd been adopted and had spent years trying to locate her birth parents. She returned to the house where she'd grown up, and the current owners allowed her to excavate the crawl space. She found a box containing newspapers from the year she was born, all of them reporting on a series of disappearances. Her birth certificate was there too, along with a note in the same handwriting from the book, reading, "Now you know why you were given away. We were protecting you from yourself." The book disappeared from her possession that night. She never discovered what the message meant, but she reported that sometimes she finds that same handwriting in the margins of other books she owns, always watching, always commenting on her choices. If a book could tell you your future, would you want to read it, knowing you couldn't change what was written? Now, for the 12th and final story, I want to tell you about the spaces between. Architects and construction workers sometimes report finding rooms that don't appear on blueprints, spaces that shouldn't exist according to the building's measurements. These interstitial rooms are usually small, often just a few feet across, but they're always sealed, and they always contain the same thing: a chair facing a wall. In every documented case, scratches cover the wall in patterns that seem random at first but reveal a message when photographed and viewed from specific angles. The messages are always warnings, variations on the same theme. Don't let them know you can see them. Workers who've entered these rooms report an overwhelming feeling that they're interrupting something, that just before they opened the sealed door, someone or something was sitting in that chair. In Boston, construction workers found such a room during a renovation of a building from 1887. The chair was old but not dusty, as if it had been used recently despite the room being sealed for over a century. One worker sat in the chair as a joke, and he later reported that the perspective from that position revealed something no one had noticed. The scratches on the wall aligned perfectly into words from that exact viewpoint. The message read, They live in the corners of your vision. They've always been there. The chair helps you see them. But once you see them, they can see you seeing them. Get up. Get out. Seal this room. The worker stood immediately, but he said that just before he did, the wall in front of him seemed to ripple, and shapes began to emerge from the plaster. The room was sealed with concrete, but he quit that day. He reported that ever since, he sees movements in his peripheral vision, shapes that vanish when he turns to look directly at them. But they're getting slower to hide. One day soon, he believes, he'll turn his head fast enough, and he'll see one clearly. He's not sure he wants to know what happens then. When you're alone and you sense movement just outside your direct line of sight, what do you think is really there? These 12 stories, these glimpses into the darkness, they share a common thread. They exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear, between the documented and the inexplicable. Scientists tell us that fear is an evolutionary response, a warning system designed to keep us safe. But what happens when that system alerts us to dangers that logic says cannot exist? What do we trust then, our rational mind or our primal instincts? Consider this as you lay down to sleep tonight. Every story I've shared has elements rooted in documented phenomena. Mirror-gazing illusions are real. Number stations exist and remain unexplained. Infrasound can cause hallucinations and feelings of dread. The ocean holds mysteries we've barely begun to explore. The human brain is capable of perceiving things our conscious mind filters out. So where does the line exist between the possible and the paranormal? Perhaps that line is thinner than we'd like to believe. Perhaps the real terror isn't in monsters or ghosts, but in the possibility that our understanding of reality is fundamentally incomplete, that we walk through a world far stranger than we permit ourselves to acknowledge. Sleep well, and remember, just because you close your eyes doesn't mean everything else does too. Some things are always watching, always waiting, always just beyond the edge of what you allow yourself to see.